Will Vladimir Putin be forced to go for another round of general mobilization in Russia in order to continue his dream of subduing Ukraine as we go into 2026? Привit, my name is Connor Klein. Welcome back to Geopolitics from Ukraine. This morning, Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, he outlined that he expects the Russo-Ukrainian war to come to an end. Presumably he means an end to the fighting in 2026, or Vladimir Putin will be forced to go for another round of mobilization in order to keep his meat grinder of soldiers that he throws into the battle going, keep that churn continuing. And on this channel, I've been outlining, since I started 18 months ago, also on the Lifestyle channel, from at least 2 years, that in the second half of 2025, we were likely to see three major issues come to a head for the Russian military in Ukraine: manpower, material, and money. And all three of those have, in fact, become major issues. We've seen that the Russian economy is now in recession. It looks like a very bleak 2026 onwards for the Russian economy. That will logically make it harder to sustain the military fight in Ukraine. It's a huge drain on the coffers of the Kremlin. They are spending officially 40% of the Russian budget on the war here in Ukraine or in internal security. Material, they have burned through huge amounts of their Soviet era stockpiles that they were basically refurbishing for use, and they are more and more dependent on the new material. So the new military equipment they can either build in Russia or get from their allies like North Korea, Iran, and China. So this has been two parts of the issue. It's not clear. They're all kind of interconnected anyways, because you need money to a certain extent to buy the material or pay for the soldiers. But manpower, they had gone for that 300,000 partial mobilization in 2022 in the autumn, when their original 2022 February invasion turned out to be a complete train wreck. It did not achieve its strategic goals. So instead of looking for peace or retreating at least back to the line of control that had been on the 23rd of February 2022, Vladimir Putin decided to go for a partial mobilization. They took in 300,000 Russian reservists into the Russian army to fight in Ukraine as a stopgap. And the result of that was 1 million Russian men apparently fled the country, worried that they might be next to be mobilized into the military, obviously not voluntarily. After that, Russia went for a strategy of paying huge sums of money to Russians who will sign up for the military. They started that around the end of 2022, beginning of 2023. They also recruited a lot of people out of the Russian prisons. If you think back to the Wagner mutiny, and just before that, when Yevgeny Prigozhin was going around the Russian prison system trying to get volunteers. Initially, they were the only people who were able to join the Russian military and actually have the right to leave before the end of this war, because many of them, in the beginning at least, they were offered in exchange for 6 months service. If they managed to survive it, then they would actually have their sentences cancelled out, and they would be pardoned in effect and be able to leave the military, be demobilized, and go back into civilian life. So a lot of them obviously took Yevgeny Prigozhin and Vladimir Putin up on that offer. However, the rest of the Russians who signed contracts, those contracts are just automatically renewed every year. So they are basically stuck in the military, even though they're getting paid huge amounts of money, which is the attraction, until it is over. And until Vladimir Putin declares that it's over and he's going to demobilize, who knows, even if there was a cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, whether he would even do that. I suspect that he would actually just use those troops, instead of letting them come home where they might be a threat to his control on power, he would rather redeploy them and at least threaten somewhere else, and he maybe even have a more limited incursion into a NATO member state like Estonia and Latvia in order to try and test Article 5 of the NATO treaty. So another factor that we have to take into account, which is at least interesting to me, is that these peace negotiations, and particularly since Donald Trump has become president once again, and him talking he was going to solve the war in a day, it has actually led to many more Russians signing up for the military in the last year than have been expected, because they thought they could sign up, get the sign-up bonus, which is a lot of money. It differs depending on where you were recruited from in Russia, and obviously the salaries way out in poor, forgotten backwaters of Siberia or somewhere else where it's extremely poor in Russia. The amount of money is eye-watering. It would take maybe an unskilled working class man from those regions, presumably maybe a decade or two, to actually earn that money outside of being involved in this war. Many of them signed up thinking that by the time they get trained, maybe there'd even be a cessation of hostilities and they'd get all this money and never actually have to fight, or only have to fight for a limited period. Obviously, they miscalculated pretty badly if you did that at the beginning of Donald Trump's second presidency, because you've already been fighting for the bones of a year, and there is no end in sight from the point of view of Vladimir Putin. And he's been dressed up in his military fatigues once again and claimed that he's going to take everything by military force and crush Ukraine and end its political independence from Moscow. So it comes with a big risk doing mobilization. Vladimir Putin has skillfully managed to avoid that since the autumn of 2022. It will make him almost certainly a lot more unpopular in Russia. He still maintains, it seems, at least from outside, a significant amount of support among the populace. But if they end up having to forcibly recruit Russian men in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, into the military to keep this war going and having any chance of achieving their strategic goals, then he risks becoming very unpopular and maybe even losing power through a palace coup. I think the chance of a general uprising in Russia are very remote. However, the fact that he would take such a risky move may undermine his grip on power. So that is what he's facing as a dilemma, because the current estimate for Russia to be able to take control, say, of the Donbas region, which they've managed to persuade Donald Trump in these negotiations or try and bully Ukraine into just giving up in exchange for promises not to be invaded again and promises of American security guarantees. That current time frame is between 2 and 3 years, and that assumes that Russia will be even able to continue to advance at the current pace. Ukraine has learned from the last few years of defending in Donbass and actually built new defense lines behind where the Russians and Ukrainians are now fighting. They're basically fighting around Pokrovsk. You probably heard the name of that town in the Donbass region. Is still a contested city, basically. Russia claims to have taken that, and Mirnohrad, however, the Ukrainians still in parts control the city. But it's not even clear that they could do it in 2 or 3 years, and that would be the temptation for Vladimir Putin to go all in, take a huge risk, and go for broke, basically, from his point of view, and finally have a second mobilization. It would definitely upset huge numbers of Russians. On top of that, with the economy going so poorly as we go into 2026, it may lower his chances of staying in power. But maybe at this point, he's willing to go for broke. He's clearly got Donald Trump and his new administration on the whole basically working in his interests with vis-a-vis Europe, with the new national security strategy being outlined, that the American goal of the administration, the White House, is to undermine Europe, force Ukraine into some sort of, it's looking at the peace proposals, a medium to long-term capitulation plan, which the Ukrainians are almost never going to sign while they remain undefeated on the battlefield. So he may think that this is his trump card, no pun intended, since I doubt he's going to be able to recruit Donald Trump to actually go out and fight on the front lines. But this may be a gamble that he's willing to take. I've been personally surprised that he's managed to avoid it for this long, but they have persuaded enough Russian men to sign up basically for money in order to go kill Ukrainians and try to destroy this country that is resisting them. So that is what we're pondering going into 2026. It comes with certain risks. I've always said that it's in the last 2 years on both channels that it's not that Russia can't find solutions to its problems. It doesn't mean that Russia's going to collapse tomorrow, whether militarily, economically, or politically, but they have to find solutions to major problems, and manpower is clearly going to be one of them. If you listen to any of the Russian propagandists who talk about, well, the Ukrainians have been killed in the millions and there's hardly any Russians dead, you should just do basic maths. If Russia is claiming to have recruited over the last 3 years 30,000 soldiers per month, that's well over a million. It's about 1.1 million approximately. Plus they had the regional invasion force of 200,000. Plus they had all the people they conscripted in the occupied areas, which is definitely well over 200,000. Plus the actual Donetsk and Luhansk militias that were there, maybe another 40 to 50,000. Plus you had other informal groups that joined the Russian fight. When you start adding all, and plus you had the recruitment they did in addition in 2022 when they launched the invasion, you get to see very quickly that if Russia only has around 700,000 troops left and almost no one, except for a few Wagner prisoners who survived meat wave attacks in Bakhmut, were actually able to get demobilized, that their casualty rate is around 1 million at least. And the Western estimates now are that it's hit 1.2 million. That's killed in action, wounded in action, and missing in action. And if they're making this kind of piecemeal progress, remember, they've only captured roughly less than 1 percentage point of Ukrainian territory in 1 year at the cost of huge casualties, then it may be very tempting for Vladimir Putin to go for this mobilization, even though it has substantial risk because his economy is in such a weak position and it's only going to get worse from here on out for Russia in that regard. That is probably his best shot. He's great white hope of Donald Trump. Yes, Donald Trump is favoring him in his behavior. He almost looks like a spokesman and a representative for Vladimir Putin. Not that Vladimir Putin will accept any of the peace proposals that he's come up with in his negotiations with the Ukrainians in any case. But the bottom line is that Donald Trump becoming president has not been enough for the Russian military to make significant progress over the last year, and he may have to do something rather dramatic if he wants to achieve his goals and his dream of crushing Ukrainian independence. I don't think it's going to work either way, but obviously if Russia is able to recruit in hundreds of thousands of more, or maybe millions of Russians to die in Ukraine, then it will drag out the war for many, many years and obviously gives them a lot better chance than what it looks like right now, which is not very good from the Russian point of view. They need to at least get to the Dnieper River and take control of the capital, Kyiv, and set up a new government to really be in a position where they will have achieved their strategic goals in this war. Even what's in the Russian constitution as having been annexed in inverted commas, which is Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, the Donbas region, and Crimea, they are still many, many years away from achieving. So I think it's probable, if he can't figure out a way to bribe Russian men to go, that he's going to have to do this. I don't think it will work, but it will mean that the war, in that case, will almost certainly go on until 2027. We'll find out in the next year whether Zelensky is right, whether he will have to give up on his dream or he will have to go for mobilization. Let me know what you think down below in the comments section about the probability of further Russian mobilization in 2026. Where do you think it will be the ace card that finally wins Russia the war, or you think it will just lead to millions of more casualties in Ukraine and drag the war out for many more years, or it will lead to some sort of political change in Russia, maybe a palace coup, maybe some sort of societal collapse in addition with their extremely weak economy. So on that note, I will say do pobачення, do перемоги from Odessa, Ukraine.